The only sound in the frozen air was the faint, steady hiss of the gas regulator and the crunch of my boots on week-old snow. It was 10 degrees Fahrenheit and dropping. I adjusted the last of the makeshift shields, simple sheets of treated plywood angled just so. They weren't pretty, but they were designed to keep the heavy drifting snow from burying the most critical gas junction in our entire neighborhood. I've spent my life in systems and risk assessment. You learn to see the weak points. This was one. A black sedan, the kind that seems to absorb light, slid to a silent stop at the curb. The door opened and out stepped Frank. Frank was the Homeowners Association's treasurer, a man who wore a $500 overcoat like it was a suit of armor and never seemed to feel the cold. His shoes were somehow spotless. He didn't approach me, just stood by his car, waiting for me to come to him. If you're watching Karenology, you know this is how it starts. It's never a friendly chat over the fence. It's a summons. I walked over, my breath pluming in the air. He didn't offer a handshake. He just held out a folded piece of paper. "Ben," he said, his voice as crisp and sterile as the air around us. "The board had a vote. This has to go. It's an unauthorized modification on common property." I took the paper. A fine. $2,000. "Frank, this isn't a modification," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's a safety measure. If this node freezes over during a whiteout, half the block loses their heat. We're talking pipes bursting in a dozen homes. It's not a joke." He gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a small, tight curve of the lips that was more about showing teeth than expressing humor. "Then let's hope it doesn't freeze, shall we?" he said. "It's called risk assessment, Ben. Isn't that your field?" The insult was delivered so smoothly it was almost elegant. My hand deep in my pocket closed around a cold, familiar weight. A heavy, obsolete hardware encryption key on a worn leather lanyard. It was a relic from a past life, from a career that had been torpedoed because I saw a risk no one else wanted to see, and I wouldn't shut up about it. Looks like old habits die hard. Have you ever felt like your past mistakes just keep finding new ways to repeat themselves? "This is a mistake, Frank," I said, my voice low. "The only mistake," he replied, turning back to his car, "would be not paying the fine and removing that eyesore by tomorrow." He slid back into the pristine interior of his sedan and drove away without another word, leaving me standing in the biting cold with a $2,000 piece of paper in my hand. I went back inside, the warmth of my small condo feeling like a different world. I stood at the window, watching the first few flakes of the predicted storm begin to drift down. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the ugly plywood. It was about the casual, arrogant blindness to a real and present danger. And it was about Frank's smile. That smile told me this was personal. The next morning, I was woken not by my alarm, but by a sharp, insistent rapping on my front door. It was too early for a delivery. I pulled on a robe and opened it to an empty hallway, but taped to the center of my door, right at eye level, was another official-looking document. It wasn't a reminder about the fine. It was a notice of lien. They had already put a legal claim against my home for the unpaid fine. It was dated yesterday. The speed, the sheer aggression of it, knocked the wind out of me. I'm an IT guy, a data analyst. I ran to my computer, my fingers flying across the keyboard, pulling up the county clerk's public records. And there it was. Official. Stamped. Filed with a ruthless efficiency that screamed, this was a planned attack. This wasn't a fine anymore. It was a declaration of war. My home wasn't just my sanctuary anymore. It was now a hostage. The word lien is such a clean, sterile, legal term for a shackle. It means they have a claim on your property. It's a financial anchor, and they had just cinched it tight around my neck. If I wanted to sell, I'd have to pay them first. The speed of it was what really got me. To get a lien processed and filed that fast, Frank wasn't just reacting, he was prepared. This was a move in a game he'd already mapped out, and I'd stumbled right into the opening gambit. My stomach went cold. I've walked the road of financial ruin before, and I recognized the landmarks, that suffocating feeling, like the walls are slowly, legally closing in on you. A low rumble of a heavy-duty truck pulled me from my thoughts. I looked out the window. A battered white pickup, with Vince's Contracting crudely stenciled on the door, had parked directly in front of the gas regulator. Two guys in dirty work jackets jumped out. Then a third man climbed out of the driver's side, Vince. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders and neck, with a face that looked like it had started a few arguments and won all of them. He was also, as I knew from the neighborhood grapevine, Frank's cousin. Funny how that works out. They didn't waste a second. Vince barked an order, and the two men started tearing down my plywood shields with crowbars. It was a violent, noisy spectacle. Splintered wood flew through the frigid air. They weren't just removing the shields, they were demolishing them, making a performance out of it for anyone who might be watching. I stood at my window, feeling that old, bitter taste of helplessness rise in my throat. What was I going to do? Run out there and start a fight with three guys who looked like they ate nails for breakfast? That's exactly what they wanted. They finished in under 5 minutes. As they heaved the last shattered piece of wood into the back of their truck, one of Vince's guys swung his crowbar in a wide arc, a little too close to my mailbox. A stray swing. The wooden post snapped at the base, and the whole box crashed onto the sidewalk in a sad, splintered heap. Vince saw it happen. He glanced over at my window, met my eyes directly, and gave a little shrug, a pantomime of whoops. The message was as clear as a punch in the face. This was step 2. First your finances, then your property. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. A notification from the official Homeowners Association community chat. It was a post from Frank. He wrote about the importance of maintaining property values and the unfortunate necessity of dealing with unapproved structures. Then came the stinger. Please be aware, he wrote, that such unsanctioned modifications can have a serious impact on our community's insurance liability. Any increase in our premiums, unfortunately, will have to be passed on to all residents in the form of increased monthly dues. It was brilliant, and it was pure evil. In one short paragraph, he'd transformed me from a guy trying to prevent a heating outage into the reason everyone's bills might skyrocket. I was no longer a neighbor. I was a liability, the enemy, and I felt the shift almost immediately. Mrs. Gable from down the street, who always had a wave for me, hurried past my driveway, her eyes glued to the pavement. A guy jogging on the other side of the street gave me a long, hard stare. The digital shunning had turned into real-world ice. I spent the rest of the day in a cold fury, pacing my small living room. They were boxing me in from all sides, financially, physically, socially. Have you ever been in a fight where you're being attacked on every front at once? You can't defend everywhere. You have to find a weak point, a crack in their armor. Frank and Vince were a team. One used the law as a club, the other used a crowbar. They thought they had me figured out. They thought I was just some quiet computer nerd who'd pay the fine and disappear. That night, unable to sleep, I was doing what I do best. I was digging, scrolling through the town's public records online, not even sure what I was looking for. I was hunting for an anomaly, a loose thread, and then I saw it, a permit filed by Vince's contracting 6 months ago. The description was vague. Emergency plumbing and structural repairs. The location, the community clubhouse. The cost was astronomical, 6 figures. Billed directly to the Homeowners Association's insurance provider. And the authorization, the thing that let it all bypass a board vote, it was an emergency clause in the bylaws. And the signature that triggered it belonged to one person, Frank. My heart started hammering against my ribs. This wasn't about my plywood shields. It never was. That was just the pretext, the excuse to put me on the defensive. This was about something much, much bigger. And they were trying to shut me up before I even knew what questions to ask. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the monitor lighting up my face. The hunt was on. I didn't have hard proof, not yet. But I had a trail. And for a guy like me, a trail is everything. The permit was the first loose thread. But a single thread isn't a rope. To hang a man, you need a rope. I spent the next 2 days in a digital rabbit hole, cross-referencing everything. County permits, insurance claims, homeowners association, meeting minutes, the boring stuff nobody ever reads. And the patterns started to emerge. It wasn't just one emergency repair. It was 12 of them over the last 2 years. A leaky roof in July, faulty wiring in October, a burst pipe last winter. Each one was a different disaster, but the story was always the same. An emergency discovered, a no-bid contract awarded to Vince's company, and a fat check cut by the insurance company, authorized by Frank under that same emergency clause. It was a perfectly legal, perfectly documented money printing machine. They were bleeding the association's insurance policy dry. I needed someone who understood the legal side of things, the language of bylaws and covenants. That's where Jenna came in. She lived 2 doors down, a young lawyer who just made partner at a small firm downtown. She was sharp, idealistic, and still believed the rules were there to protect people, not just to be twisted by guys like Frank. I caught her on her way back from a run, her face flushed from the cold. I laid it all out for her on my dining room table, printouts, highlighted sections, timelines. At first, she was skeptical. "Ben, this could just be a coincidence," she said, tapping a finger on a stack of invoices. "The clubhouse is an old building. 12 times, Jenna, 12 emergencies, all just under the threshold that would require a full board vote, all going to the treasurer's cousin. That's not a coincidence. That's an algorithm." She spent an hour poring over the documents, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she looked up, a glint in her eye I hadn't seen before. "You're right," she said quietly. "The emergency clause, it's the key. They're using it as a loophole to bypass oversight. It's written so vaguely, he can declare almost anything an emergency." She pushed a copy of the HOA bylaws towards me. "We need to challenge the definition of emergency, but to do that, we need proof that there was no real emergency." That was the problem. How do you prove a pipe wasn't about to burst 6 months ago? It's his word against ours. The whole scheme was built on things that had already been fixed. It was diabolically clever. As if on cue, my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Is this Ben?" a man's voice asked. It was rough, like gravel in a blender. I said it was. "You've been asking a lot of questions," the voice said, "about things that don't concern you. It's a good way to get your other kneecap broken." The line went dead. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. My blood ran cold. Kneecap? What did he mean, other kneecap? And then I remembered. Let me back up for a second. The reason I left my old career, the reason I lost everything, wasn't just a disagreement. It was because I uncovered a massive data skimming operation. My boss told me to drop it. I didn't. A week later, 2 guys in a parking garage taught me a very painful lesson about corporate loyalty. A shattered kneecap that still aches when the temperature drops. No one in this town knew that story. No one except the people who would have read the background check for my current job. A job that Frank had just put in jeopardy. This wasn't just Frank and Vince anymore. They'd brought in outside muscle. The game had changed. This wasn't just about money and rules. It was physical. It was a real threat. Have you ever had a moment where you realize you're in way over your head? That's what this was. I felt a knot of pure animal fear tighten in my gut. I was staring out the window, my mind racing, when I saw Gary, our mailman, making his rounds. He stopped to right my broken mailbox, propping it up as best he could. He saw me in the window and gave a sympathetic shrug. Gary knew everything and everyone. He was the neighborhood's central nervous system. I went out. "Thanks, Gary," I said. "Don't mention it, Ben. Shame what happened." He lowered his voice. "Saw a weird truck parked here the other day, you know, right by that gas thing. Not Vince's, some other company. Precision Utilities or something. Never seen him before." My mind seized on it. A new player. Maybe they were the ones who made the call. Maybe they were the real threat. For the next 2 days, I became obsessed. I spent every waking hour trying to track down a ghost company called Precision Utilities. I searched business registries, phone directories, online forums. Nothing. It didn't exist. It was a dead end, a phantom. And that's exactly what they wanted. While I was chasing this ghost, wasting precious time and energy, the real attack was coming from a direction I never saw. I was looking at the board, trying to figure out their next move, when the knife came from under the table. The knife wasn't literal, it was worse. It was a phone call from a number I did recognize. HR. It was my boss, Dave. His voice had that forced, unnatural cheerfulness that managers use when they're about to ruin your day. "Ben, my man, how's it going?" he started. I knew immediately this wasn't a social call. "It's going, Dave. What's up?" There was a pause. I could hear him shuffling papers on his end. "Listen, Ben, we've got a bit of a situation here. We received a complaint, an anonymous one, of course." He sighed dramatically. "It alleges that you're conducting unauthorized commercial activities from your home office using company resources, specifically the high-speed data line we pay for. My blood turned to ice. It was a lie, but it was a beautifully crafted one. It was just plausible enough. Dave, that's insane. I'm a salaried employee. What commercial activity could I possibly be conducting? I know, he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. But the complaint references your recent disputes with your homeowners association. It claims you're running some kind of private investigation service. Look, my hands are tied. Per company policy, I have to place you on temporary unpaid administrative leave while we conduct a formal review. Unpaid leave. The words hit me like a physical blow. That was it. That was the checkmate. They hadn't just come after my home, they'd cut off my income. The one thing that allowed me to fight back. The precision utilities lead, Gary's well-meaning tip. It was all a diversion, a clever feint to keep me busy while they lined up the kill shot, and I had walked right into it. Dave, this is a setup. It's retaliation from my HOA, I pleaded, my voice tight with a desperation I hated. I believe you, Ben. I really do. But a complaint was filed. A process has to be followed. It's out of my hands. It was the corporate version of, I'm just following orders. He told me to turn over my company laptop and phone. My access would be revoked within the hour. The call ended. I just sat there, in the silence of my home office, the tools of my trade now useless bricks on my desk. This was the exact feeling I remembered from years ago. The same crushing sense of being outmaneuvered by a system that was bigger, dirtier, and more patient than I was. The feeling of being utterly, completely alone. What would you do in that situation, when they've taken your job, threatened your home, and turned your neighbors against you? Part of me wanted to just pack a bag, walk away, and let them have their rotten little kingdom. Let the whole place freeze. The sky outside was turning a bruised, heavy gray. The promised storm wasn't just coming, it was here. The wind began to howl, and thick, wet snow began to fall, not in gentle flakes, but in a blinding horizontal sheet. A whiteout. The kind of storm that makes the world shrink to the few feet in front of your face. My phone buzzed. It was a mass text from the Homeowners Association's emergency alert system. The sender was Frank. Due to the sudden severity of the storm, the community clubhouse will be open as an emergency warming center for any residents who lose power or heat. Stay safe. The sheer unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. He was herding everyone into the one building he knew was a potential death trap, all while posturing as their savior. But it was the next notification that made my heart stop. A new message in the community chat, posted just seconds after the emergency alert. It was Frank again. Friends and neighbors, it began. In light of the current weather emergency and to ensure our community's resources are protected, the board has called an emergency Zoom meeting for 7 p.m. tonight. The sole item on the agenda will be to approve a one-time emergency expenditure for the immediate and full replacement of the clubhouse's failing heating system. The estimated cost is $150,000. A proposal from Vince's Contracting is attached. I clicked the attachment. It was a slick, professional-looking proposal, complete with diagrams and cost breakdowns. A proposal that couldn't possibly have been drafted in the last hour. It had been waiting. They weren't just exploiting the storm. They had been waiting for it. This was the big one, the master stroke they'd been planning all along. They were going to use the panic of the storm to ram through their biggest payday yet, and I was unemployed, silenced, and powerless to stop them. Or so they thought. The clubhouse heating system wasn't failing. I knew it. The boiler was only 3 years old. I had seen the installation permits myself during my late-night digging. The problem wasn't in the clubhouse. It was 50 yards away, outside, getting buried under a mountain of snow. The gas regulator. Frank was about to scare the entire neighborhood into buying a brand new 6-figure heating system they didn't need from his cousin, all because of a $20 problem he had deliberately refused to solve. The rage that went through me was so pure and hot it almost felt calm. It burned away the fear, the self-pity, the despair. This wasn't about my lien or my job anymore. It was about 100 families who were about to get robbed blind in the middle of a blizzard by a man they trusted. But what could I do? My company laptop was a paperweight. My evidence was a collection of digital files I no longer had access to. Jenna could argue the bylaws, but that was abstract. I needed something concrete, something undeniable, something they could see and feel for themselves, right now. My eyes fell on the window. Outside, the world had vanished into a swirling vortex of white. The wind shrieked, and I could see the snow piling up in huge drifts against my neighbor's fence. The regulator would be completely buried by now, and when it was, the pressure would drop, the safety valve would trip, and the gas would cut out. Not just to the clubhouse, but to my house, too. I needed help, not a lawyer, not a hacker. I needed someone who understood pressure, pipes, and cold. I scrolled through my phone's contacts, my mind racing, and then I saw the name. Sal. Sal was a retired fire inspector, a grumpy 70-year-old cynic who had seen every scam, shortcut, and shoddy construction job the county had to offer over a 40-year career. He had helped me out with a code question on a deck I built years ago. He hated cheats more than he hated cold winters. I called him. "Ben, you know there's a blizzard out there, right?" He answered, his voice a gravelly rasp. I explained everything fast. The fake emergencies, Vince and Frank, the lien, my job, the snow shields, the coming Zoom meeting. I laid it all out. He was silent for a long time after I finished. I thought maybe he'd hung up. "So they're claiming the boiler is shot?" Sal finally asked. "That's the play," I said, "and everyone in the clubhouse will be freezing, so they'll vote yes. They'll see it as their only option." "It's a good grift," Sal admitted, almost admiringly. "Clean, uses the weather as cover, but they made a mistake, a big one." "What mistake?" I asked, leaning forward. "Negligence isn't just about doing something wrong, kid. It's about not doing something you're required to do and not documenting it. That gas regulator is commercial grade. It's feeding a public assembly space. It's supposed to be inspected and pressure tested annually. And there's supposed to be a logbook, a physical signed-off logbook kept on site." He let that sink in. "Ask your friend Frank to show you the logbook for the last 3 years. Ask him to hold it up to the camera." My mind exploded. It was a checkmate move, but from a different board. Sal wasn't just giving me a piece of advice. He was giving me a weapon, a procedural nuke. "He won't have it," I whispered. "Damn right he won't," Sal grunted. "Because if he did, the inspector would have flagged the regulator's exposure to snowdrifts a long time ago. He's been dodging the inspection because it would have killed his golden goose." Suddenly, I had a plan. It was crazy. It was theatrical. And it was my only shot. I needed to show them the problem, not just tell them about it. I grabbed the heaviest coat I owned. My phone had a built-in thermal imaging app, a gimmick I downloaded ages ago and barely used. It wasn't professional grade, but it might be good enough. I also grabbed the biggest, brightest kettle I owned. This was going to be a show. Just as I was heading for the door, my own heat sputtered and died. The low hum from the vents went silent. It had happened. The regulator had frozen. Frank's problem was now everyone's problem, and I was about to make it his personal nightmare. I stepped out into the storm. The wind hit me like a solid wall, stealing my breath. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. It was a dangerous, stupid thing to do. But as I leaned into the wind, kettle in one hand, phone in the other, I felt a grim smile spread across my face. They wanted an emergency? I was going to give them one, right on live television. Fighting my way through the blizzard was like walking on the bottom of a churning, frozen ocean. The snow wasn't just falling, it was attacking from every direction. The 50 yards to the gas regulator felt like a mile. By the time I reached it, I was covered in a thick layer of white, my face numb, my hands burning with cold. The regulator was exactly as I'd feared, completely entombed in a solid drift of packed snow and ice. It was just a vague white lump against the wall of the clubhouse. There was no way any gas was getting through that. This wasn't a boiler failure, it was suffocation. I worked quickly, my fingers already clumsy with cold. First, I opened the thermal camera app on my phone. I pointed it at the mound of snow. The screen showed a uniform, deep blue, the color of absolute cold. I took a few screenshots, the timestamps clearly visible. Then, I opened the kettle. The steaming water hit the impacted snow with a loud hiss, sending up a cloud of vapor that was instantly torn away by the wind. I poured the entire kettle over the spot where I knew the main valve was. It was a desperate, crude solution, but it was all I had. I dug away the slushy, half-melted snow with my gloved hands until I could see the dark metal of the regulator valve itself. I toggled the thermal camera back on and pointed it at the now exposed valve. It was still blue, but not for long. Slowly, as the residual heat from the water and the friction of the flowing gas inside took effect, a tiny spot of orange appeared, then red. It was working. The gas was flowing again. I filmed the whole thing, the glowing red heart of the regulator, a stark contrast to the frozen blue of the pipes leading away from it. Evidence. Simple, visual, undeniable proof. I trudged back to my condo, my heart pounding with a mixture of adrenaline and the sheer physical effort of the journey. I had less than 20 minutes until the Zoom meeting started. I stripped off my frozen outer layers, my body shivering uncontrollably, and sat down at my personal laptop. I emailed the video file to Jenna with a one-line message: "Get ready." At exactly 7 p.m., I clicked the link to the Zoom meeting, my screen filled with a grid of anxious, worried faces. I counted over 80 participants, neighbors huddled in blankets, their faces lit by the glow of their phones and laptops. Frank was in the center square, looking calm and authoritative against the backdrop of the clubhouse's handsome stone fireplace, which, I noted with grim satisfaction, was unlit. "Thank you all for joining on such short notice," Frank began, his voice radiating false concern. "As you know, the clubhouse's heating system has catastrophically failed. It's an old unit, and frankly, we're lucky it lasted this long. In this unprecedented storm, we cannot risk leaving our community without a reliable safe haven." He droned on, laying it on thick, painting a picture of impending doom. Then he shared his screen, displaying Vince's polished, exorbitant proposal. "Vince's Contracting has generously offered to begin work immediately, tonight, as soon as we approve the expenditure." This was my moment. I used the raise hand feature. After a moment, Frank, with a flicker of annoyance, unmuted me. "Yes, Ben, can we make this quick? We're on a tight schedule." "You're right, Frank. We are," I said, my voice steady. "But before we vote to spend $150,000, I think we all deserve to see the problem for ourselves." I shared my screen. But it wasn't a document. It was the live feed from my phone's camera, which I had propped up on my desk. I switched it to the thermal view. "This is a live thermal image," I explained. "It shows heat. The hotter something is, the brighter it glows." Then I switched to the video I had taken just 20 minutes earlier. The Zoom call fell silent. Everyone watched the grainy footage of me in the storm, pouring a kettle of water onto a mound of snow. They saw the deep, uniform blue. They saw the steam. And then they saw the bright, beautiful, blooming red of the regulator coming back to life. "As you can see," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "the problem isn't a catastrophically failed boiler. The problem is a frozen gas regulator, a regulator that was left exposed to the elements after I was forbidden from protecting it." I stopped the video and went back to the live thermal feed of my hand. "This is what 100 degrees of body heat looks like," I said, holding my palm up to the camera. "And this," I clicked, bringing up a screenshot of the frozen regulator before I'd cleared it, "is what 20 degrees below zero looks like." A murmur went through the virtual room. People were leaning into their cameras, their eyes wide. Frank's face was a mask of cold fury. He was cornered, and he knew it. "This is amateur theatrics," he sputtered. "You're not a qualified technician." "You're right, I'm not," I said calmly. "But you know who is? A certified fire inspector." And right on cue, a new face appeared in the Zoom meeting. Sal. His nameplate simply read, Sal F., Inspector, Ret. He had the grim, unimpressed look of a man who had seen it all. "Frank," I said, a cold smile touching my lips, "my friend Sal has a simple question for you. Could you please show us the state-mandated annual inspection and maintenance log for that gas regulator? The one you're required by law to keep on site. Just hold it up to the camera for us all to see." The silence on the Zoom call was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that follows an explosion. Every face in the grid, all 80 of them, was locked onto Frank's square. His calm, authoritative mask had shattered. His face was pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a magician whose trick had just gone horribly, publicly wrong. The logbook?" Frank stammered, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape route in the digital room. It's in the filing cabinet, in the office. The power is out. I can't possibly—" Sal unmuted himself. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that commanded attention. "That's a shame," he said, without a trace of sympathy, "because failure to maintain that logbook is a Class B code violation. but knowingly filing a fraudulent insurance claim for a failure caused by documented negligence? That's a felony, son. Sal didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Every word landed like a hammer blow. You could feel the entire mood of the meeting pivot on that one word, felony. This was no longer a neighborhood squabble. The neighbors weren't just cold anymore. They were looking at the man who was supposed to be protecting them and seeing a criminal. Jenna, the lawyer, unmuted. "I'd also like to point out," she said, her voice clear and precise, "that per Section 11(c) of the bylaws, any expenditure proven to be the result of managerial negligence is the sole financial responsibility of the board members who approved it, not the association." That was the kill shot. Frank wasn't just facing legal trouble. He and his cronies were now personally on the hook for any damages. The whole house of cards came down at once. People started unmuting, their voices a confused, angry babble. "So you were going to make us pay for your mistake? He put a lien on Ben's house for this? This is fraud!" Frank didn't say another word. He just stared into his camera, his expression blank with shock. Then, his little square on the screen went dark. He'd left the meeting. The aftermath was swift. The insurance company, tipped off by an anonymous email containing a recording of the Zoom call, launched a full-scale fraud investigation. Frank and Vince were caught dead to rights. The lien on my condo was dropped, and the $2,000 fine was canceled with a groveling apology from the remaining board members. I got my job back, along with a personal call from my boss, Dave, who couldn't apologize enough. A few weeks later, at a tense emergency town hall, the residents voted to dissolve the old board and elect a new one. They asked me to run. I thought about it for a second. The power, the vindication. It was tempting. But that wasn't the victory I wanted. You ever get to a point where you realize winning the game isn't the point, but changing the rules is? I declined, but I made them a counteroffer. "You don't need me on the board," I told the crowd. "What you need is transparency." I offered to volunteer my time to help them set up a new system, a completely open blockchain-based ledger for the HOA's finances. Every fine, every contract, every expenditure would be a public, unalterable record for any resident to see, anytime. No more secret deals, no more emergency loopholes. They agreed. The final symbolic act of this whole mess took place in my quiet office a week later. I sat with the newly elected board president, a retired school teacher named Martha. I took out my old hardware encryption key, the relic from my past failure. For years, it had been a symbol of what I'd lost, a reminder of a fight I didn't win. I plugged it into my computer. I used it to generate the Genesis block, the very first unchangeable entry in our community's new, transparent financial system. I gave the key to Martha. "This belongs to the community now," I said. It wasn't a trophy, it was a tool. My personal symbol of defeat had become the foundation of their security. I won. But there's always a price, isn't there? My quiet life is over. I'm the guy who took down the board. People stop me in the grocery store to ask about property code or suspicious contractors. I've traded my anonymity for a strange kind of local fame. I'm no longer just a neighbor, I'm a watchdog. And that's a job that never really ends. If you've been through a fight like this, maybe drop a comment and let me know how it changed you. Because it always changes you. You never quite go back to being the person you were before the first punch was thrown.